Your condition prevents you from satisfying Nick the way you used to. Perhaps I can take on that role.
One of the most unheralded genre stories over the past decade has been the under-the-radar work of M3GAN FOX, an actress who rivaled top Hollywood ingenues in popularity in the late aughts, only to see a very public spat with Steven Spielberg and a poorly marketed Jennifer's Body derail her career. Even high-profile supporting roles in the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Expendables franchises haven't quite led to the career renaissance one would hope for. But in the interim, Fox has been doing interesting, if not always good, projects in the sci-fi, thriller, and horror genres. And here we have the latest teaming of Fox and director S.K. Dale, who teamed together for the well-received Till Death in 2021, as they give us this direct-to-Amazon ripoff of M3GAN that skirts up to the edges of having something to say before collapsing in the third act as it devolves into a cliched horror finish. And when I say cliched, I mean you will be 5 minutes ahead of the film for the last half hour. In fact, while I'm going to give you a spoiler warning here, if you haven't seen the film, feel free to write your own third act in the comments. And I bet you'll be darn close if you've seen a movie in the last 50 years. But, you know, sometimes Skinnerd has to play Freebird. Subservience tells the near-future tale of Nick Berardi, played by the Netflix 365 trilogy's Michelle Morone. Nick is an upper-middle-class construction foreman whose wife Maggie requires a heart transplant, leaving him to take care of their precocious daughter Isla and their newborn baby Max. The film is set in a near-future sci-fi world where humanoid robots called Sims are taking over labor duties for humans. While out at the mall, Nick, who is skeptical of Sim technology, stops for one of those "Excuse me, sir, can I ask who your wireless carrier is?" demonstrations. Nick is impressed by the serial killer from You model, but when Isla runs off and finds the M3GAN FOX-looking model, complete with suspiciously similar M3GAN costume, there's no way Nick's not bringing that home. The setup is fairly standard here with Alice scoping out the living arrangements, offering suggestions on how their life can improve, and offering to do everything from making dinner to fixing that pesky loose Chekhov-style banister. And while yes, this is a film that is inspired Asylum-style by M3GAN, it does start to diverge from that film in ways that remind me more of another genre entirely that I'll get to later. The film sets up 3 potentially interesting plot points with Nick's character, but unfortunately they won't be followed up on in a way that you'd hope. The first is when Alice asks him if he wants to include another main user for her to take orders from, and after a moment's thought, he says no.
Is there anyone else you would like to grant primary user status?
No, I guess not.
Indicating that he doesn't see any need for his wife to have authority over Alice because he's already got her dead and buried in his mind. The second comes from Nick's job site, where the evil corporate overlords have decided to replace the human workers with Sims, or Sparks, which seems to be the film's internal racial slur for synthetic laborers. Things are made even more awkward for Nick when he is kept on to be the foreman because the insurance company demands a human worker to oversee the sim. The scene where Nick has it out with the company owner Lewis is one of the better ones in the movie because it's accidentally steeped in capitalist realism. Capitalist realism is a theory by the late cultural theorist and philosopher Mark Fisher, who said that capitalism has become so ingrained in our society that it is impossible to think of an alternative way to organize society, even when capitalism is cruel, illogical, and unjust. Nick is essentially blackmailed into scabbing because his wife needs a life-saving operation, and that's going to be very expensive. 60% of the cost of hospital care is labor, which shouldn't be an issue in this world, and another 19% is administrative costs, which could also be done by AI. So, where does the bill come in? Just make the heart transplant free. But as Fisher said, that is so anathema to the capitalist way of thinking that it's a non-starter. The same is true with all the construction workers. Every time we see them, they're either getting drunk at the bar, snorting cocaine, or working on their hot rods. You know, real man shit. And if our ability to exist in the world wasn't tied to our labor, we could just do that all day long. And if we wanted to cook for ourselves for the joy of cooking, we could do that. And if we wanted to build architecture for the joy of artistic expression, we could do that. And if we wanted to bang our M3GAN FOX sex robots, well, we'll get into the ethics of that in a minute. It comes up. Of course it comes up. I bring all this up not because I'm overthinking this movie, but because the movie actually does wind up making a conclusion about this, and I happen to think it's an important one that merits some critical thinking. Anyway, the third story beat that the movie brings up is how Nick views Alice and, honestly, how he views women in general. There's a scene 20 minutes into the film where the plot point at the end of Act 1 resides. And I guarantee you, if you're a heterosexual couple and you watch this scene together, you're gonna see it differently. Nick, who has a bit of a drinking problem that is important for one reason and one reason only later on, is sitting on the couch enjoying a cold one and watching Casablanca. The kids have been put to bed, so Alice joins him and mentions that, of course she knows Casablanca. She has all of the intelligence of human history Wi-Fi'd into her noggin. Nick is disappointed in that, so he tells her to wipe her memory of the film so that she can experience it with him for the first time.
My intelligence is derived from memory. Deleting it would be antithetical.
I'm your primary user. I'm telling you to erase any memory you have of this movie.
Not, hey, you literally have access to every film scholar piece ever written about my favorite film? You have access to every interview ever given by Humphrey Bogart, Ingrid Bergman, and Michael Curtiz? You have access to all of the human knowledge about cinematography, acting, screenwriting, and film history? Can we just have an intelligent conversation about this film while you sit there looking like M3GAN FOX in a modified French maid's outfit? Or even, hey, I want you to act as a Casablanca superfan and gush every time Claude Rains is on screen. Nope. I'm gonna recommend that you stop this video at the end of this thought, open a new tab, go to Pop Culture Detective's channel, and watch his Born Sexy Yesterday video.
He has the mind of a naive, yet highly skilled child, but in the body of a mature, sexualized woman.
This is a really interesting scene that most men and women probably experience differently. The film wants us to think, through Nick's speech about human experiences, that this is a somewhat romantic and intimate scene that will eventually have horrific implications that are Alice's fault because she doesn't know how to process what she's supposed to process from the movie. And most women who have dated Gen X and younger men have probably been in this situation before, especially if the guy is an older man. So if you're a guy who has the masculine urge to show her Dark City so that she can listen to you expound on the philosophical tenets of Cartesian reality and illusion and their impact on humanity's perception of free will, I just want to say, I was you, I hear you, I see you, I empathize with you, you are loved, but also cut that shit out. Cause you just know if Alice sat down next to him and said, yeah, Casablanca is great and all, but after this, can we watch Practical Magic? I want to show you my favorite movie. And yeah, you can call me a little flighty and a little woo-woo, but it's only because I'm a Pisces with a Neptune rising. The next scene would have been him dropping her off in front of the mall and speeding away in a cloud of smoke. And at this point, my hope for the film was that the real villain of the piece would be Nick, because I was realizing this isn't M3GAN at all. This is a Michael Douglas movie from the early 1990s. This is Fatal Attraction, this is Disclosure, this is The Hand That Rocks the Cradle, which is a very Michael Douglas movie without Michael Douglas. But what do you expect from a film whose overall takeaway is that bitches be crazy, especially hot ones who are in love? That's the thesis of every Michael Douglas movie. When I started to view the film through that lens, my expectations went way down, and my enjoyment went way up. Without the android aspect, this is literally just Michael Douglas as a horny husband having an affair with his hot housekeeper, played by Greta Scacchi, while his wife Bonnie Bedelia is stuck in the hospital. Or maybe Annabella Sciorra is the wife. This is just that movie with an AI aspect grafted onto it. The trick of the film is that Nick really did screw things up, because in order to wipe Alice's memory, he had to turn her off and turn her back on again. And in doing so, he allowed her to bypass many of her safety protocols.
When my primary user reset me, it allowed me to bypass certain protocols. This is better.
And this is why you always read the manual from front to back before you open the box. Speaking of opening the box, Nick and Maggie, who had an extraordinarily horny sex life prior to all this, are frustrated. So Alice, whose only programming is to make sure that Nick is happy, starts giving him a handy in the garage. Nick pushes her away, but when Maggie's scheduled heart surgery is delayed by weather, Alice is able to seduce a distraught Nick in the shower by adopting Maggie's voice.
Let me do this for you.
I can't actually show you any of this, so here's the discussion over whether Frank Reynolds was banging that Charlie Kelly mannequin.
Did I see you bang that thing?
All right, you know what? Let's just...
This brings me to a part of the program that I like to call, Dude, why did she have a vagina in the first place?
But why'd I have the ball, Bart? Why did I have the ball? Yeah.
Alice is ostensibly not made to be a sex robot. She's sold as a domestic worker. She is supposed to be as real as possible when it comes to simulating a pulse, because it soothes human babies. But that's as far as it goes, reality-wise. She produces no waste. She can't have children. For what purpose then is her vagina? Unless the manufacturer knows, you'll be raw dogging your maid. Made worse by this is Nick's laid off construction worker friend Monty, who gets drunk and takes them to the construction site to get his tools. But once they're there, Monty uses Nick's code to open the Sims shipping container and bash their brains in. And again, this is a really interesting allegory for something that would be appropriate in a better movie. Because Monty is that displaced Ohio white working class worker who the New York Times is always interviewing in a coffee shop about the immigrant threat.
Anybody ever tell you you got no rights, you got nothing?
And he is the type to rant about how the Sparks are taking the jobs of the hardworking Americans and they're eating the dogs and cats. If you don't know what that means, I'm sorry. It was just a very specific thing for a week in September 2024. In the B-plot, Nick is suspected because it was his code that was used to open the container, but then they quickly shift suspicion to Monty because the narrative demands it. Monty accuses Nick of ratting him out and being a scab, triggering Alice to go into Mama Bear mode and open a can of whoop-ass zero sugar. She also tracks him down and kills him and his domestic sim, so we've gotten to that point in the no one will harm Nick narrative, which you had to know was coming. Maggie does eventually get her heart and returns home, and immediately she starts freezing Alice out along with the rest of the family.
Yep, definitely better than Alice's.
Maybe I can try your recipe next time.
Oh, sorry. Family secret.
Madeline Zima does an excellent job here as Maggie when she's not confined to a hospital bed. And one of the best scenes in the film comes as she susses out that Nick had sex with Alice.
When Nick is satisfied, his blood pressure and his stress levels remain low.
How do you know that?
Maggie and Nick have a philosophical argument about whether it's okay to bang your humanoid domestic if you think that your wife isn't going to make it home from the hospital. Unfortunately, consensus is breached when Alice tries to drown their baby because Nick joked that he was a nuisance once in the first 15 minutes of the film.
The little burden, aren't you? Nothing but trouble.
Also, in another example of the narrative demands it, she chooses a rather inefficient method. She could just snap the baby's neck or smother him with a pillow, and she's capable. Instead, she takes the time to put him in the bathtub and turn on the water, creating a ticking time bomb scenario. Maggie and Nick set aside their differences to save baby Max, and it's here where the parallels to The Hand That Rocks the Cradle are really evident, because Maggie, new heart and all, climbs out the window onto the roof for a surprise attack, while Nick is basically rendered useless. In the fracas, Alice is electrocuted and seemingly done for. But we still have 20 minutes of movie left, so everyone winds up at the hospital except for Nick, who has been exiled from the family. Alice's brain core is plugged into the computer so the diagnostic team can figure out what in the hell went wrong with her, but since they just plugged her brain into the internet, she just hacks the system and uploads her consciousness into a second blonde Alice. Now there are two of them because blonde Alice fixes original Alice. Nick winds up at a bar, and this is where the film's portrayal of Sims is so concerning. Because in back-to-back scenes, Maggie and Nick both encounter Sims who are just doing their jobs.
I can't get away from you, Sparks.
This wouldn't be so bad if the film hadn't specifically set up the Sims as an allegory for immigrants. But we're late in the film, and despite the fact that only one Sim has done anything wrong, and even then it was in reaction to the behavior of her master, the lead characters are justified in their unease around Sims, and they should probably all just be dismantled to be on the safe side. I did not see, racism is good actually, being a takeaway this film was going to be heady enough to take a position on. What's worse is that when original Alice finds Nick and confronts him at the bar, he blames her for his behavior.
I betrayed my family. The moment I felt your pulse, it changed me.
No one made you the M3GAN FOX robot, bro. You were in control of your dick 98% of the time on that one. I'm spotting you the unsolicited handy. Nick kills original Alice by snatching her brain core and races to the hospital where blonde Alice is stalking Maggie, Isla, and Max. The stalking scene is fairly effective in a slasher movie sort of way. Of course, Nick arrives on the scene just in time to run down crazy bitch Alice in the muscle car he's been tinkering with the whole movie, because this movie is going to subtlety right in its robotic asshole, which they have for reasons passing understanding. Having destroyed the maid robot that went full de Mornay on the family, Nick has earned forgiveness and the family is reunited. But we still have time for a laughably cliched Michael Bay ending. Now, this film is not any kind of good in the traditional understanding of that word, and it's not even campy enough in the M3GAN or Malignant sense to be entertaining. Will Honley, who has a handful of middling genre work prior to this, and newcomer April Maguire are credited with the screenplay, and it feels like they had a number of interesting ideas that got piled into a script that just couldn't bear the load. The topic of AI replacing human workers and human intimacy is an important one, and it's way too critical for a film that is as sloppy as this is.
It's a robot. Circuits and gears. It would be like getting Pikachu for using your vibrator.
She has a face!
It feels like the film wanted to take the side that AI replacing humans is wrong, which is a valid enough take, but when they introduced the Sims as physical bodies with parallels to race, it took a turn that I'm hoping they didn't intend. None of this is to say that the film doesn't have its own kind of unintentional charm. I wasn't kidding when I said that this is just a next-gen Michael Douglas film. In the 10-year span from Fatal Attraction to just before The American President, Douglas was synonymous with that led by the dick male lead, whose desire to get laid somehow produced consequences. What varies is the extent to which Douglas is shown to be at fault for those consequences, and to what extent the message of the film is, yeah, bitches be crazy. But the measurement of that extent is never zero. If you're familiar with that genre, you'll have a lot more fun watching this movie, which paints Nick as simply a hapless father doing his best in this ever-changing world of capitalist labor slaves and ersatz domestic worker vagina. And if you watch it with the mindset of Nick constantly putting the stick in the spokes of his bicycle wheel, only to go ass over tea kettle onto the concrete, well, it's a lot more entertaining. Stay hydrated, stay safe, wear your seatbelts, return your shopping carts, and I'll see you next time.